I am currently a graduate student at Drexel University, so learning about science policy and ways to get involved is kind of important for me now, thinking about next steps moving forward. I'm also part of the, as Heather mentioned, AWIS Philadelphia chapter. And so again, glad to be part of this event and looking forward to all the discussion. So the way this will work is we have our 4 panelists here who will give brief introductions about themselves and their career paths, and then we turn it over to the audience for questions. We have a number that have come in pre-submitted from the audience members here, and Heather will be also moderating the chat to compile all of the questions that come in live, and that way I can ask them out. So with that, Adam, our first panelist, would you like to start your introduction?
Sure, thanks for having me. So my name is Adam Katz. I'm currently the Senior Manager of Grassroots Advocacy at the American Society for Microbiology. My pronouns are listed here under my name, he, him, his. I feel like you're going to hear this a couple times, but, I'd like to give a quick disclaimer that as much as, I'm with ASM, I'm here joining all of you lovely folks on my own and, not representing anything from the society. So the SparkNotes version, the very quick highlight version of how I got to where I am. I started off as a PhD student, never advanced to candidacy, but started off as a PhD student studying functional neuroanatomy in the University of California system, where I then left for a master's in biomedical science. I still, after all these years, have to write it out. A master's in biomedical science and policy with a specialty in emerging infectious disease and threats, where I then went to a broad medical and health research advocacy organization. At one point I burned out, which I feel is very DC, and I went and I managed at a bar for quite a bit for a good stint there, which surprisingly, and we can talk about this later, but allowed me to continue networking. One of the fun things about the DC area. But then I got to return back to what I like to refer to as my occupational home, where I started doing a lot of grassroots organizing and policy work with the Society for Neuroscience. And then recently, in approximately the last 8 months, have moved over to the American Society for Microbiology. So as you might imagine, some of my examples will be drawn from both places. And really, the constant thread in my career has been really working to empower and enable researchers across the career spectrum to engage their elected officials on their own behalf, ideally, with our support. But, a lot of the central tenets of advocacy are, I don't want to say redundant, but are universal and cross, between interests and fields. And so as you may have picked up from my career path, other than the bartending, my entire time has been in nonprofits, so I'm hoping to bring some of the 501c3, which is the tax designation for nonprofits, without a political action arm to this panel. And so with that, I'm happy to be here, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you. Adriana?
Hi, thanks for having me on here. I'm Adriana Bankston. I'm currently a principal legislative analyst with the University of California system. Similar to Adam, I have to say first that I'm here in the personal capacity, do not represent the UC system here, but happy to talk about sort of the day-to-day. So my transition has been really very tied to the academic system and wanting to, think about how we might improve universities while I was still a student and a postdoc, and getting involved in committees and sort of leadership roles in that way. Similar to Adam, again, a lot of my transition has been through nonprofits, really very targeted to empowering early career researchers in academia, as well as sort of outside, how do we train students for different careers. So I've done sort of both sides of this. One of the really, I think, most substantial experiences has been through the nonprofit Future of Research, which is essentially meant to empower, again, early career researchers in academia and sort of give them a voice to advocate for policies and institutions, sort of bottom up. And then sort of transition from that into how do we help them go into non-academic careers, which has been largely through the other group, which is the Journal of Science Policy and Governance, which again is specifically directed to helping early career folks write on their policy topics. And then currently, I think, so one thing to mention, which I'm sure will come up again, is my background is very relevant to what I currently do. I transitioned here through fellowship at Society for Neuroscience, and really learned sort of the basics of what it means to be on the Hill and advocate and write sort of policy documents, which I really haven't done before that. And that was really helpful for what I do now. But my sort of day-to-day job again is very tied to the academic system. I do a lot of sort of translating science policymakers for faculty and students who come and advocate in DC, and trying to kind of build that into going back to my original interest of workforce development and early career, which has happened more now actually because of COVID. So there's been a higher focus on sort of the pipeline now and what that looks like because of the pandemic. So it's been an interesting twist to my current role here.
Maria?
Hi, thank you to AWIS for having us all, and to Heather, to Ankita for hosting us tonight. My name is Marilyn Dahlberg. I use she, her pronouns. I am a study director and a senior program officer at the National Academies for Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. I work with the Board on Higher Education and Workforce, as well as the Committee on Women in Science, Engineering, and Medicine. Most of my current work focuses on trying to understand and support the next generation of scientists, engineers, healthcare professionals through the creation of more inclusive and equitable learning environments and working environments. You might be noticing a theme with our speakers tonight. I am not going to speak a lot about my work. Again, none of us, I think, are representing our institutions. We're representing ourselves. I don't actually have to do that disclaimer, but I felt sort of left out by not doing it. So I don't do that work at a research institution. I don't do de novo research at all. I don't even draft legislation or try and implement policy or regulations. The National Academies cannot and is not allowed to lobby. We are also a 501(c). Instead, what I do is I gather experts together to review and discuss and come to consensus understandings about the evidence that is available, that other people have done the research on. And then where appropriate, we make recommendations about how a field or a sector or an institution or regulations should move forward. My background is not at all really relevant to what I do. I'm a physicist by training. I came to the National Academies by way of an absolutely fantastic fellowship called the Christine Mirzayan Science and Technology Policy Fellowship, or the Mirzayan for short. I'm really excited to talk about that later if you guys have questions about it. At the time when I took that fellowship, I was working on writing my dissertation. I was in like year 6 or 7 of my PhD. You lose track at some point. And I knew that I wasn't where I wanted to be, but I sort of gotten there by a process of inertia. I'm probably one of the few people you will meet who goes into a grad school for physics because it's the easy path forward. Let's just say my family is really ridiculously academic. One day, a family friend of ours, I'm not going to name him because he's got close connections to the National Academies and you're about to figure out why, got high as a kite and he asked me what I wanted to do with my life. And because it was high, I didn't feel like I was getting judged as much as I normally do when I get asked that question. And so I told him that I didn't want to be where I was, but I didn't know where I wanted to be. And so he told me about the Mirzayan Fellowship and I applied and I didn't think I was going to get it. And then I got it. And within 2 weeks of being at the National Academies, it sort of fit right in. What I like so much about my position is that I still get to meet really amazing scientists and world thinkers and learn from them sort of continuously. I basically write master's theses and PhD dissertations for a living. I just do it by committee now. I hop from one subject to another. Over the past 9 years, I've worked on reports that cover how do we provide healthcare to the people who really need it, that like top 5% of users, to what can we do with optics and photonics research, to I'm working on a project right now on all of the programs at NSF that have to do with the Earth system sciences, all of them, to just sort of how does the federal government fund research in general. The skills that I use most, though, in my job are actually the ones that I developed while I was managing theater. It's the ones that I use to bring giant egos together and create a single vision on budget, on time, and to make them all feel like it's theirs, that they bought into it, that they created this thing together. It's that sort of cat herding that I really, truly enjoy. And to boot, I get to do it and try and create a better STEM ecosystem for people who are coming through it right now, to give them a space where they feel like they belong, to find their space and to find their home. So I'm happy to talk more about what we do. Most people don't really know what the National Academies do, even the people who work there. And yeah, excited to answer your questions.
And finally, Reba.
Hi, everyone. Just to say, also echo my thanks to the organizers for this panel and for hosting this event, and for everybody who showed up to listen to us talk and to ask us good questions, because we are all like super excited to talk about these things, as you can kind of tell. I will do the disclaimer, even because I kind of have to, but nothing that I'm here to say is all about me, my own personal opinions about things, and I don't represent the NSF. But the NSF is where I work. I am a legislative and science policy analyst for the National Science Board, which is the governing body of the National Science Foundation. And so I'll explain what that is in a minute, but I am an astronomer by trade, and I spent, I guess, 20 years as a practicing astronomer, if you include grad school. So the whole kit and caboodle. From about 1995 to about 2015. And I did all the things that you do as an academic. I did grad school, I did multiple postdocs. I got I was soft money research faculty for quite a long time. And I did, supervised students. I did all the things. I went to lots of conferences and ran conferences and did all the things you do as an academic. Wrote many papers and competed for funding and went for PIs on things and stuff like that. Did all that stuff. And then thought, gee, is that what I'm going to do now for the next 30 years? Maybe not. And then I thought, well, there's other questions that started to become very interesting to me, which were not questions about, I love astronomy, first love, right? And I love the stars that I studied and the black holes that I studied. But my elevator pitch on this is that over time, I began to wonder, I was lucky enough to be able to study black holes for a living. I'd like to make sure people can continue to study black holes for a living. And so when you think about that, you start to think about what are the ways we make choices here in the US, also worldwide, but specifically in the US, about how we fund research. How do we fund academia? How do we do research? And then, hey, we got all this good research. How do we make sure that the climate in the country is better for being receptive to what science and what evidence and what data are telling you about, and how can that be in the room when decisions are made about what goes on in, choices that the country is making in governance space, for example. And so I was like, I started asking around, like, how do people get it? I had friends who were big program managers at like NASA, or who were people who had kind of gotten into NSF as a program officers. And I'm like, how do you get into these spaces? And somebody finally said to me, you should try the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships. And so I said, oh, that sounds good. And then after a first run where I didn't know what I was doing, I did a second run, and they have congressional fellowships and executive branch fellowships, and I applied for and got both. So I decided to go for the congressional fellowship first, and I spent a year in the U.S. Senate working as a policy staff member to Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii, background, also where I did all my research on the Big Island. So this is my whole thing about Hawaii. And he was amazing. He was a very new senator at the time. He had just been there for about less than 2 years. So it was a really fantastic opportunity to kind of come in on the ground floor of a new Senate office that was just really getting started. And like they were just figuring out where their policy goals were. And there was a lot of fluidity and a lot of welcoming to people. And it's like the best office in the Senate. Don't ever, you can fight me, but I will fight that to the death. And he's of course now kind of more high profile. People know him on Twitter. he's genuinely a great human being. He's also like 3 months younger than me, which is a little disturbing. So he was like all the guys I went to camp with. So that's when I discovered that policymakers and people in Congress are just like us. They're mostly just like regular people, and you can have conversations with them. And they are, they're very high powered, and all of these things are happening, but they are actually just regular people. And so it's definitely you should reach out and talk to your representatives because they are just regular people. After that was done, I went for the executive branch fellowship and landed in the National Science Board office. And I stayed there for 2 years, an executive branch fellow, and that's all she wrote. I'm still there. I'm there now forever, or at least until they kick me out or send me somewhere else, or I get promoted or get demoted or whatever. And what we do there is I like to think of us as a little bit of a policy think tank for science and engineering inside the federal government. The National Science Board, for those of you who don't know, they are statutorily the co-heads of the agency with the NSF director. There are 24 presidentially appointed board members that serve terms that are kind of like Senate terms, where they each get 6 years and they rotate anyway. So, but they are presidential appointees, just not Senate confirmed. Makes our lives a little easier. They do governance and policy for the foundation and oversight of the foundation, but they also have a role for where they are the advisors to the president and Congress on matters of science and technology and STEM education. And because they are associated with the NSF and they're not associated with the administration in per se, they're not like PCAST, which is associated with a particular administration. They're apolitical, and we are bipartisan, apolitical. We talk to both sides of the aisle in Congress. We talk to whoever is in the White House and the OST and the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And so what I discovered in the process of all of this is that I got a taste in the Senate for I like supporting principles. I like being in the room where it happens. I like talking to the people who make the decisions and giving them the information. And we write a lot of we ghostwrite legislation. We ghostwrite when it's in the Senate, you ghostwrite the policy documents. You're the one doing kind of a lot of the heavy lifting and helping to shape things. So you're in the NSB, we're very fortunate that our members are very collaborative with us. So they are very, the staff and the actual members have a really quite good relationship. And it's very, very open. It's a lot of, of course, they're in charge and their direction is what, sets the day. But we, they trust us. We trust them. We have a lot of great conversations and really have a lot of fascinating opportunities to kind of take policy ideas and get them into the places where they need to be in order for things to happen. And that includes on the legislative side, like I spend a lot of time, we talk to Congress a lot, both sides, multiple offices. We talk as staff. We take our members to see the members of Congress. We talk to the White House a lot. There's a lot. So it's how can we get things? It's a great opportunity to get ideas about what do we want to do with our federal S&E enterprise writ large, not just for NSF, because they have this wider role into the world of things that actually happen. That's what I do on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you. I guess we can get started with some questions that were pre-submitted. Pretty general one, open to everybody here, the panel. How can I, as a scientist, be most helpful to those already working in policy? So anyone who wants to jump in.
Okay. So how can you as a scientist be helpful to people working in policy? That was the question.
Yep.
I think, if you're interested in policy, it depends on what you mean by help. If you're interested in particular things like how do we advocate for particular legislation, or how do you advocate for budgets, for example, around science agencies, reaching out to your members of Congress is always a good move. They like to hear from constituents that things are actually important to people who vote for them in their local place, that it's not some abstract thing. One of the things we do is to try and arrange for students and postdocs and people who are at the bench, scientists who are working scientists, to come speak to with authenticity and passion to the folks who are funding these agencies at a gazillion foot level, and they don't really realize what it is that they're enabling. And so I think that those personal stories and that personal passion is really a big deal. So I would recommend reaching out to those things, and then also looking if your scientific society sponsors any participates in the Congressional Visits Day or has policy alerts or things like that. You can get a lot of information from those places about how you can when they ask you, hey, could you call up and talk about this bill, or how come you can come and lobby with us. Those are things that might be of interest.
To build on that a little, one of the reports that I've worked on was actually the back history of it was postdocs came and spoke with a senator who was so moved by their story that they wanted to know more about what was happening. And so the senator got legislation written for the National Academies to look into that report. And so that was one way that working on the bench scientists helped the National Academies, because then we were able to actually inform what was going on. But then during the course of that study, we actually put out a request for information. We put out a poll, basically. We wanted to know what was going on in the field. And so that's another way that's actually really important for our work. We don't know everything. We're not going to be able to understand everything. We don't really do the de novo research. So if we put out requests, it's important to get that information back in. And, so even just signing up for our email list might seem like a small step for you to take. But if you take it and then you can respond when we ask for information, it's going to really help us get the best reports and get the best information that's out there.
No, and sorry. No, and I was going to say, and likewise, even scientific societies, very often when you are looking at, at a government relations team or a policy team within a scientific society, you will find a lot of people with either a master's or an interest in the science. I know Adriana spoke, to a fellowship, but that's really where the PhD and the scientific expertise comes in there. A lot of policy wonks are either lawyers or public policy majors or of the sort. And so it's always helpful for us to hear from someone who's so for instance, at the Americans at ASM, we're building up a science policy program and a government relations office, really re-envisioning it. And we're like, okay, these are the 8 things we think are important, but we had to go back to our members, to the scientists, to say, well, where should we begin? We don't have the bandwidth to cover 8 issues right now. Right now we're still a small shop. Where should we begin? What's going to make the biggest impact on the field, or what has the broadest appeal to you, as members of your professional society? So lending your expertise and chatting up your government relations people, strongly encouraged, can confirm, we want to hear it.
Yeah, I guess I'll echo that as well. So in my role, there's, like I mentioned, there's a lot of different types of research that we advocate for. There's so much going on in the UC system. There's always something that we're trying to, get more funding for, get more buy-in from somebody. But what Adam said is totally right, that, a lot of policymakers don't have science backgrounds, so they really rely on your expertise, even as a faculty or as a postdoc, or somebody who really is in the research. And the other point to make is that they like to hear from constituents, so it's really helpful, I think, to meet with them as well. And I make this point because I think a lot of times students and postdocs a lot of times don't think that they have an influence, but as was mentioned by Reba too, if you can participate in these sort of organized activities like a Hill Day or virtual Hill Days now is really helpful for kind of getting your voice out there, even as an early career person.
Thank you. And that also answers a question we got about these kinds of action alerts and how effective they really are and how to get involved. I guess the next one we can go to is, what is the easiest way to stay up to date on the most new policies that are being considered for legislation, and how much does that matter in your involvement? Open again.
I would just put in a plug for the American Institute of Physics, the AIP, has a really great newsletter called FYI. It's an e-newsletter. It's extremely comprehensive. I mean, of course, there's a physics bent to some of what is in there. And as a person who is
what's wrong with the physics bent?
Right, I'm there with Maria. Sounds good to me. But I mean, it's got like roundups of news articles, roundups of legislation, things that are going on in Congress, and they have multiple, I just would recommend, regardless of your field, if you're interested in this, go sign up for their e-newsletter. I think it's a great resource.
Mm-hmm. Again, as a biologist, I follow AIP's FYI just as closely as I follow FASIB's Inside the Beltway. So they're, different professional societies, even umbrella organizations. I would explain, I would spell out what FASIB stands for, but I always get it wrong. But basically, they are an umbrella branch for experimental and biologic science organizations. And, they also put together, a bang up job on, kind of compiled legislative updates. I also want to say ASBMB. I could keep listing off acronyms, but, I'll spare all of you.
I'll note also AAAS has started doing a pretty good one. I think it's not as comprehensive as AIP's, but they've got a nice sort of synopsis one that covers a lot of different facets of the policy world. And if you're a member, it magically pops in to your inbox. Also, AAAS is a really great organization if you are in the policy world. It's umbrella across all of the various sciences. It's as close as we get, I think, to a policy professional word.
We also have a question on are there any concrete ways for trainees to get firsthand exposure with science policy during their training? Please.
Well, the Christine Zion Fellowship, as I've been telling some folks in the chat box as well, you do not need to have completed your PhD, which is great. So they do like you to be in grad school at least, but you can be anywhere sort of along the path. It's only 12 weeks long, which is another thing that's nice. So it is pretty easy to sort of take a step out and step back in if you're into that thing, or if you're me, you just step out and never go back. I have had fellows during my course that I've sort of overseen at the National Academies who have been writing their dissertations while they are in the fellowship. It's apparently possible. And there are people who have gone back to grad school afterwards. They've gone back to postdocs afterwards, or they've just gone back to academia. And then there are folks like me who go and stay with the National Academies. There are people who go on and work with various aspects of the federal government or state legislatures and governments and policy world, or they go to, federal agencies or into industry. It's a nice little bit of a fire hose of information, but it's there, and it's a little less constraints on the eligibility than a lot of the other programs out there. If you are not yet in grad school, there are often opportunities to do internships. Look for one that's going to pay you, please. The National Academies does have summer internships at the undergraduate level that are paid internships. They are not as consistent of a program, and it's by board or in group by group. So, but they are out there. And I'll let the folks from the other groups talk about whether or not they have similar programs.
So I can chime in here too. So sort of what's been really helpful for me has been kind of this two-pronged approach of developing both kind of a local presence and getting involved sort of national organizations. Again, I was sort of trying to cultivate this, higher education policy space. I would say at your institution, if you have a science policy group, that's really helpful, or you can start one, which a lot of people have kind of used that experience to build their expertise. The other thing that's really helped is, again, this plugging again for a professional society. So I was involved with the public policy committee from the American Society for Cell Biology as, again, sort of as a way into being involved with the society as a scientist and then transitioning as a policymaker. It's a really nice way to learn about how things work if you can join a committee like this as a trainee and learn from experts who have been doing this for a long time, because they write statements on behalf of the society. You really get to see kind of how some of this is done. And then again, it sort of helps with getting some leadership experience at the national level too. So again, this idea of kind of building your expertise in your name and policy, kind of, I would say both local and on kind of at the national level too.
So we are getting a lot of questions on what is your day-to-day look like. And I apologize if I'm jumping back and forth here. I'm trying to keep track of like one logical flow. But if anybody wants to talk specifically, we have the question for Adam, but anyone else as well.
Yeah.
What does your regular day look like?
Sure. I'm happy to take the first pass at that. I think Adriana and I were colleagues for a brief stint while at the Society for Neuroscience, and I think she will back me up when I say it really just depends. It depends on the day of the week. It depends on what policy issues have kind of become a bigger deal overnight than we may have anticipated, or if we're trying to launch a program. But speaking more recently, at a position where we're building up and reimagining a department, it's, and at the risk of answering other questions that have come in, it's a lot of gathering stakeholders, whether they're internal or external, and to build off what Maria mentioned earlier, it's making sure that everyone has the buy-in, and feels the ownership and the pride and the authenticity with what they're doing. It's really not fair to try and picture what an idealized day is or looks like. But often it's working with members. In my case, those are traditionally going to be bench researchers, whether they're anyone undergraduate through faculty, PI, and borderline administration folks. Administration within a university or a scientific research org, where it's answering questions about what does policy mean, or how can they get involved, or how can they share their story, or why, when the world reopens, would a lab tour or a site visit be important or impactful to different members of Congress? And then building around that, it's what supplemental materials need to go with that, what resources can we curate and put online, what should go into our newsletters, and it's working with people, for everyone from our website and IT team to our communications colleagues. And so really, it's really a fast-paced, dynamic environment that I feel that anyone who does research and likes to follow the moving parts and follow the thread can really thrive in, if it's for if you find it personally fulfilling. And with that, I'm going to stop running my mouth.
So I'll follow up on Adam. So one thing to mention, which was sort of brought up before, is that it's really a very generalist kind of role, to think about this as you're going from your, science, where you're used to kind of working on a project for so many years. This is really sort of, you're scratching the surface on a lot of, 20 different things in 24 hours, as opposed to kind of diving deep into one thing. In my role, as I mentioned, we advocate for a lot of different things. So there's kind of some organized ways to do this. So for example, we have Humanities Advocacy Day coming up, these things that sort of happen regularly every year, so you know when that is. and how that's going to go. There are also, researchers that come to DC, and we take them to the Hill sort of to advocate for their work. So there's this sort of ad hoc things that happen. And so in this sense, there are days when I maybe, would be on the Hill potentially maybe half the week or maybe 2 days, don't even go into the office first. Now we're in a virtual space, but normally, there are times when I don't even go into the office sometimes for a couple of days. Other times it's sort of more on the other side of, you're doing research. So because we, serve the campuses and the system, we do get questions about the federal space in terms of grants, for example. So I'll, spend a couple of days researching grants that they can apply to in a specific area. We're trying to collaborate with HBCUs, and what does that look like, and where do you find that? Because there's no database for something like that. So you kind of, there is some research component to this as well. And then the other thing, which I think I really enjoy about this position, is that we really intersect with a lot of different stakeholders depending on the issue that we work on, right? So we'll be sort of, obviously, we do a lot of advocacy on the Hill. We work with a higher education association, so it's interesting to see, AAU is thinking about these same issues that we advocate for. We do work with NSF as well, and again, with folks there who sort of work on similar things. So it's been really interesting to see kind of the different perspectives on the issues that we work on from all these different groups, and that really makes it interesting as well.
Okay, any of the other two panelists, or I can move on to the next question?
I mean, I can just reflect that like every day is sort of a different adventure. There is fundraising, and there is writing, and there is lots of Zoom these days, but in person there is lots of meetings and getting to know people and forgetting their names and then trying to remember them, and lots of business cards, or at least there used to be, and many emails. And yeah, I think it's just, digesting information and then reconfiguring it in different ways for different people. And I saw a question go by in the chat on like, what are the top 3 communication skills? Facilitating conversations, writing for 17 different audiences, the same thing for 17 different audiences, because they will all digest it differently. And then being able to speak. Having a voice. It doesn't have to be a proper voice, but having a voice that will allow your information to be digested by different people.
Yeah, I would agree with those things, and writing is a huge one. So if you're out there and you're doing your scientific paper publishing and you're writing your thesis, like, don't ever let anybody tell you that the quality of your writing for those things doesn't matter. The quality of your writing is the most important thing possibly in your thesis. Being able to tell stories with your, from your personal experience, from your data, being able to make a case for something in that communication space. Like, how would you make an argument for something? But how do you do it diplomatically and understanding all of the needs and desires and interests and whatever of the stakeholders or the people you're talking to? There's a lot of diplomacy involved in policy, and understanding, sort of being able to read people and sort of thinking about how you can bring people together in a constructive way when you're bringing those all, and so that everybody can kind of get to goals that they have in common. And that means being able to work with people sometimes with whom you do not agree on many things. But I could continue to contend that we have an advantage in science and technology and engineering, is that it is it's something that most people at kind of writ large believe is a good thing, and believe is something that's worthy of time and investment and an effort. And so they don't all understand everything about it, and there are parts people don't like, and there are parts, all of those things. But in general, it's a place where I think there's still a lot of bridges that exist. That there's, you hear about a lot of things in DC about things being contentious, or, people at loggerheads. And I think one of the things that I sort of see as a personal mission is to keep this bridge open, because I think we can do it. I think this is a place where we can have agreement and coherence and work together constructively. And I think that can be a bridge for a lot of other things if we can do that with people. So that is part of the skill set of the communication skill set that you kind of learn on the fly, but see how it works in your daily life too, when you're working with your lab mates or working with your people in your organizations, like campus organizations, or if you're a kind of student government or all these other kinds of things, or you've done those, then you get a sense of it. It's very similar. That kind of skill is helpful. You can learn it anywhere.
Yeah, if I can add to that also, there is a lot of teamwork and collaborative projects. So I think it's more collaborative than anything else. So it really, I think, teaches you, and I think a lot of us kind of learn on the job too, is how do you work with all these different types of people. The other thing to mention is you're really, like we mentioned before, you're sort of the expert on certain areas, but not others. Bringing a scientific perspective, I think, is interesting to sort of the mix with different perspectives. So that's, keep that in mind too.
I might just jump in and say humility is helpful also. I mean, we all are, scientists, and we have, learned a lot, and we are experts in our fields. But you'll, run into, when you start working in the policy world, people are experts in other things. And those other things are also perspectives that are important, whether it's economics or, kind of social issues, or other, how, kind of environment, or how society, groups of people have interests. And those are all valid things that go into policy making. So having that ability to listen and kind of, understand what those other perspectives are, and then figure out where the meeting points are, is important. So, one of the things they tell us when we come into these fellowships is, don't come in and assume you're going to, figure out, you've got the answer to solve the world, and because the data, and this is, you can't, that's not how it works. So a little humility goes a long way.
Yeah, there's a question in here about the soft skills that are needed, and I think Reba just hit on a big point there, is that lack of ego is how I've always framed it, and that's lack of ego in your writing, lack of ego in how you're talking to people, just in general. This isn't about you. This isn't about getting your face or your name or your voice out there. This is about getting the science out there, or getting the policy written correctly, or getting the information to the right people at the right time. And if you wanted to phrase it a certain way, but other people didn't, okay, that's just how it is, right? There, especially at NASM, I'm not the author of the things I write. The committee is the author of the things I write, and they will trash my work constantly. So, I mean, soft skills are humility. Major soft skill, and this comes up over and over again, both in the research as well as in work, is empathy. You have to remember that not only are the people that you're working with in these collaborative projects coming at it from different angles, but often they have labs that they're running and kids that they're wrangling, and they're dealing with, the fact that their sister just got corona, and a variety of other aspects are happening. And if you need something by a deadline, it's probably going to get blown through. So you deal with it, and you adapt, and you move on, and you don't throw tantrums, because that's not going to be functional for anything that's happening. And I think that, that's necessary in any job that you're going to be in, that especially one that's going to involve other people. And then all of the skills that you're going to need in terms of supervising or engaging with other people who are going to support you in this work. You can't do this without a team that's working with you all the time. And if you try and do it yourself, you're going to burn out and you're going to fail. So figuring out what the strengths of your other team members are is essential, and then working to give them what they want so that they can develop their careers, because that's going to be the best. Also, it's really fun to watch people develop into the careers that they really want to do.
I would just say if you're worried, if you're a person who's really concerned with credit, this is not your job.
Oh yeah.
Right? Because we all ghostwrite things. We're all behind the people behind the scenes on a lot of stuff. Like you can happily over drinks with your friends, point out where the bits of the things are that you got into the legislation are, or which phrase you coined and that got into things and is now being used by everybody and their brother. It happens to me all the time. But the only people who are ever going to know that are you and your office mates and a few other people. So you have to be happy about that idea.
So we do have a question here on policy relating to science education. How can scientists get involved in science education policy? Adriana, would you want to, because you kind of alluded to that in your background.
Yeah, I would say find, organizations and nonprofits that work on these issues and get involved, volunteer, do projects. It'll teach you some of these skills that we discussed here. I think it's helpful also for, again, kind of building your reputation and brand and, moving up and that sort of thing. So finding people who sort of enjoy the same field that you do is helpful. And, I know people that mention that, they always ask whether these opportunities are paid. And I will say along the way, I've done things that were paid and things that were not, and they were all really helpful. And so, I guess I would argue that volunteering can get you far if you're sort of in the right space with the people that are working on similar things.
I'll note that my job wouldn't exist without volunteers. So yeah, thanks. All of our committee work, all of the committee stuff is all done by the experts are all volunteers. They all volunteer their time for us. I made a comment earlier about, if you're going to do an internship or a fellowship, you should get paid. And that's because those are significant time commitments that are contributing to the work that's being done at that institution. And I firmly and utterly believe that to be true. At the same point, when there are service jobs and service contributions that you can be making in addition to your job that can bring a lot of satisfaction and a lot of skill development, and having those be volunteer positions, and only you can make the decision about when to do those additional pieces of work.
We also have a question now, jumping back a few moments ago to when we were talking about effective communication and writing. Are there any workshops for scientists to improve their writing skills as it relates to policy, or sort of more broadly communicating to more general audiences? Reba, would you have any insight on this?
I was just putting in the chat that I don't particularly. I did a lot of, I did a lot of writing in this is going to sound ridiculous. I did a lot of writing in high school. I do a lot of reading. I've been reading my whole life. I've been reading the newspapers. I've been doing all this stuff. I was almost at it's almost a double major with English Lit. So I had a lot of writing interests and skills beforehand, and I didn't really have to put them into too much use during in science, it was fine. You wrote papers. It wasn't like, that kind of writing is very clean and sort of straightforward. I really learned them on the fly. I can't help. I'm sure there are good options out there. I know a lot of people started off as, I had a lot of friends who did like personal blogging as a way of honing skills in writing in terms of kind of thinking about policy problems or problems that they were interested in. But honestly, yeah, I learned it on the fly. So maybe other people have something better to say.
I was going to chime in that we had a committee season, again, working with volunteers where, we write up our memos with everything we've done and that we think we want them to do for the next, year. And then they tell us all the different ways that those memos could be improved upon. And I remember very distinctly, speaking of working on your writing, and that my boss pulled everyone into the big conference room obviously when we could still do that, and said, this was the holiday season. He goes, I got everyone on the team, a holiday gift. And it was a primer on how to write better. He goes, let's all try to work through this and do better next season. So, I think that the real takeaway there is, yeah, absolutely look for, the proper opportunities, to either receive training in it but really just get the experience, and just continual process improvement, try to, do better than you did last time. And that will make you stand out even heads and shoulders above the crowd, as much as that's very aspirational and non-directional advice. Yeah.
I'm the best writing advice that I ever got was to read, and read a lot, particularly read the style of things that you would like to write. That is a good part of advice, but it's not always the most useful, particularly if you don't have a lot of time on your hands. I note that Heather put into the chat box a link to the National Science Policy Network. If you don't know what the National Science Policy Network is, it's a pretty cool organization that has sort of willed itself into being over the past several years. It is basically a grassroots group of mostly graduate students and some undergraduate students forming chapters across the country at different universities of students who wanted to know more about science policy. So they started pulling together the information they could find, and then they linked themselves together. So it's basically clubs at universities across the country linking together to form a national organization of students who are interested in learning more about science policy. And I do believe that they are figuring out writing courses on science policy and other training opportunities in science policy and fellowships in science policy, and they're pulling together other information, and they're growing every time that I check in with them. They're bigger and they're more robust and they have more information. So if you are interested, I highly recommend that you get involved with them. Also, a lot of times professional organizations do have writing workshops. Sometimes they're focused primarily on scientific style writing, which has been mentioned is pretty specific. But sometimes it's a little bit broader and has more opportunity or flexibility in it. I believe SOCNIS has had a few, NISB has had a couple, and I want to say, oh, no, blanking on other ones. Sorry, I'm not going to try and put myself out there. But yeah, there are some good opportunities to look. Oh, I think AAIS has had some writing workshops as well put out there. So their professional organizations can offer some good stuff, but sometimes also your employer will have stuff available. My employer, it turns out, they don't do a lot of great professional development, but their writing courses are pretty awesome.
I know we're getting pretty close to the time that we break out into rooms. So maybe one final question for our panelists. What do you define success as? What is your measure of success for your projects that you work on? You can start calling on people.
If nobody's gonna go, I'll go.
Somebody asked, I'll go, and then I'm gonna hand it. I'll give it to Maria. Somebody asked in the chat earlier whether you got to see, like, I got to see something in that I did in the Senate kind of make it into the legislation. I did, actually. It's kind of a good story. It turns out to be it was 8 words, but it changed the way that travel was done for scientists in the federal government in an appropriations bill. So you're like, what did you get? I got 8 words into the bill, but that's okay. It was a big deal. That's not the only thing. There are others, but I think the end, honestly, for me, there's a lot of great stuff on team building and I love my colleagues and I enjoy the environment, but it is really satisfying to see ideas that you have make it into the ecosystem of policies that actually are acted upon, whether that's at the agency, in legislation, kind of getting it through the gauntlet. It can take a really long time. It's not like it's a fast process, but it happens. You can see an idea through and it morphs over time, but you can see an idea through to actually making change, and it's a heady thing.
Yeah, success for the National Academies is really project dependent, right? We've had a report that basically didn't get read by almost anybody. Eventually it did, but initially it didn't get read by almost anybody, but it stopped the use of chimpanzees in research, except in very specific cases, because we gave it to NIH and we're like, we don't think that this is a good idea anymore. And they were like, oh, okay. That change got a lot of press, but our report, not so much. We've had language lifted from our reports and dropped into legislation, like literally a paragraph out of the sexual harassment of women report from 2018, verbatim plopped into legislation. That's a huge deal for us. But we've also had times when just like the language and the way that we framed information in a report sort of oozes into the ecosystem, and suddenly we start hearing the conversation shift and change. I'm noticing that with the mentorship report. We did the science of mentorship, and I don't think I can take credit for that. And the committee can't really fully change. I think there was time for people to change how they were speaking about mentorship, but suddenly it seems a lot more that people are talking about why multiple mentorship structures are just the norm, and that PIs need to be trained in how they're mentoring people, and that institutions should include mentorship in their promotion and tenure advice. Those are our recommendations. That's what we had in our report, which is pretty cool. But I can't trace it back to people reading my report and saying, check, check, check. So I can't claim credit, but it kind of feels like we did something.
So from my perspective, similar to Maria, in a sense, a lot of success for us, I think, is getting language into legislation, getting more money for the issues that we care about, lobbying for these things. UC also, likes to be a model for other institutions and be kind of at the leading edge on some of these things that other institutions follow. So I think that's sort of the professional side. And I mean, on a personal level, again, where all these things sort of intersect, is that I would like to see more early career voices in policy, and their perspectives included in legislation and the things we do. So I'm hoping to do more of that in the future.
No, and I feel so fortunate to be on the grassroots side of things, and as we've heard, throughout, always be with a mission-driven organization. While I'm not necessarily the person who's going up to Capitol Hill and advocating, for a specific change or whatnot, but it's working with researchers, with scientists who are starting to explore this as a career path, or who are doing this on the side of their day job. And we like to say that nothing breeds success like success. You see that light happen the first time they walk into a congressional office, or they start to hear the bells buzzing in the halls of Congress or whatever, and it's like, what's going on? And really seeing that click, that a scientist is able to go and talk to a policymaker or their staff very often about what's important to them, and see that connection, and to be that convener. While that may not be a metric of success on a performance review or whatnot, it's part of what makes the job so personally fulfilling. So yeah.
I think that's a great note to wrap up the panel discussion on. Thank you all for speaking on our panel tonight. We are scheduled until 7:30, and the plan is that we will randomly assign some breakout rooms. Right now, it looks like we can get about, we're dropping 3 or 4 participants or so into a room. Yeah. And that'll be a good chance to kind of network one-on-one with some people. We do have to end promptly at 7:30, so that there will be just the one room. We're not going to do a shuffle. But with that, I'm going to click create, and we'll go into rooms. And feel free to save the chat so that you can get all of this excellent information later. Open rooms. Did it work?